Welcome to the wild, wild west of adulting with your co-hosts Anniedi, Essien, and Christina Farinacci-Roberts. Today's episode is called How to Stay on Course When Plans Change. Now, we have the option of either being change makers or order takers, and I think many of us by now have probably gotten inundated with emails, a flurry of emails that kind of feel a little bit like spam, but from every company we've ever done business with, okay, over the past week, reassuring us that, they're taking a course of action with regards to, the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, the question becomes, how are we actually formulating our response, whether we work at companies large, medium-sized or small, whether we are our own actual business owners and sort of navigating through this time. I think last week was an opportunity to sort of think about the response in a structured way, but this week is the time to actually take action, right? So not just policy that we're putting on paper, but how are we actually responding to and listening to the changing needs. So Christina, I'm not sure what you're seeing in the feeds, how people are reacting.
Yeah, so there's the one person that had something in her feed. It says, to every company I've purchased goods or services from ever, thank you to each of you for sending an almost identically vague virus response email. And then in some of the comments, someone was like, I got one from a hotel I stayed at about once 12 years ago. Then she responded, I just got one from my local marijuana dispensary, LOL. And then what else? Oh, this one was my favorite. So her other friend writes, KFC seemed to be really concerned about my health. I mean, not when they were trying to get me to add a chocolate chip cake onto my family-sized bucket meal order, but now I really think they're starting to care. That one just about had me literally crying 20 minutes ago. So yeah, I mean, I think that everybody is, whether it's KFC or the government, everybody's trying to give a sense that everything is under control, that they have a plan in place. Meanwhile, we know nobody knows what's happening. Everybody's scrambling. And so there is definitely like a lot of opportunity to figure out what does this mean for all of us at the ground level. I think we talked about how last week was a little bit surreal. Like everybody was kind of like, is this really happening right now? Like, or are we going to wake up and it's just going to be this bad dream that we had? But I assure you it's real right now. And I think in some ways it's an eye opener for everybody. Definitely, I feel like in the States, we live in our own little bubble, and there's a lot of people who've been experiencing disruption and unrest and uncertainty in other parts of the world as their normal. And so this is just giving us like a tiny awareness, because I saw on another person's feed something to the effect of like, we are being quarantined like with our ability to read a good book, binge watch Netflix, eat from our stocked cupboards, still go to the grocery store. Like even while it's challenging for us, like it's still in many ways a first world problem response to things that in other parts of the world that they have to do these things. They kind of don't have that luxury. I don't know if that makes sense. So I think.
Well, I mean, you're bringing up sort of a range of issues, right? So when you think about response, it's like, how are we using this time? How are we using the tools and resources that are available to us to come up with a response? How are we using that quiet time to sort of prepare and think about what is needed? And I think that looks different for everyone. So I'm not a fan of the first world, third world, concept, because I think everybody sort of innovates in their own way, and there's lots of opportunities for us to look at how other countries are sort of handling and navigating with this. But I think if we were to stratify and say, okay, small companies, medium companies, large companies, then your point is really spot on, right? So it's thinking about, what can I do if I don't have the resources of a larger organization to tackle and respond to this problem? Maybe I don't have the luxury of binge watching Netflix, but is there something that I can do with pen and paper that can also, bring this concept to life. So I think it's about thinking about ways to get creative, right? And that first point you talked about, companies like listening to their customers, it's this has been a great time to connect with people that you may not have connected to in a while. They're home, they're not on planes, trains, and automobiles. So from a relationship building perspective, it's been nice to reconnect in that way. But think about, if you're a business owner, how are you actually connecting with your customers now? Like, what are their specific challenges, concerns, um, obstacles that they're facing? What's keeping them up at night? And then how can your services or the relationships that you've built with them over time help to tackle that problem? I think it's an opportunity to strengthen that relationship and think about the customer experience in new ways. I don't know if that's resonating with you, because I think
Yeah,
we can
no.
either retreat and not interact at all and wait till this all blows over, or we can actually march forward and actually tackle the problem head on. I think companies have those two choices.
Well, I'm looking at things, obviously my go-to and my background is education. So I'm watching as schools are trying to respond to this now emerging need of educating students when they are not in front of them. Now, granted, we've been integrating technology into classrooms for a while now, but there's definitely a vast array of how much, even not even just district to district, but even within one school, you'll have one teacher who's really integrated technology pretty seamlessly. And for that person, this transition could be a lot easier than for somebody who has been a little bit more phobic around technology, and as somebody who's a little bit more phobic around technology, excuse me, I I can sort of empathize with those people, but it's also sort of a wake up call to them that they can't keep waiting to um, to get with the times, if you will. And so I know that I'm seeing, somebody did a post about how, like, it's not the policymakers, it's not state ed that's coming, it's teachers and principals on the ground are coming up with solutions for their students. And I think that what this translates into is conversations about flaws and broken pieces in the system that already existed. It kind of reminds me of the Trump thing, right? Whether you're a Trump supporter or anti-Trump, a lot of things that have been said are, Trump is not the root of the problem. He is sort of he's the fruit of the root, right? Like, so the issue is that what this situation is doing is, it's not that it suddenly created problems that didn't exist. It's bringing to the surface the problems that were there, but now we're actually forced to confront them in ways that maybe we had the luxury of sort of turning a blind eye to, or trying to say, well, we'll get to that when we can get to it. And so I know that for me, who's now outside of the system, I'm looking for ways to get myself back into the system and offer alternatives in terms of how, when we come, not only for solutions in the moment, but we are going to eventually come to the other side of this. And then what are the long-term sustainable things that I can be trying to present to potential, clients, which would be schools at this point.
I definitely hear what you're saying in terms of this highlighting this issue, circumstance, united challenge that we're all facing, highlighting some of the systemic issues or underlying cracks in the system, or flaws, as you mentioned, right? And my background, similar to yours, in healthcare. And I think, healthcare was resource constrained before, it was short staffed before this pandemic hit. And so now it's really highlighting with a sense of urgency some of those issues that many, maybe hospital systems, local providers, your primary care doctor's office were struggling with on their own. And now it's sort of bringing those issues more to the fold. So what's been really interesting to watch is some of the creativity that has emerged as a result of who's now stepping in to solve those different problems. So I remember seeing a post that Christian Siriano, former designer for Project Runway and recent mentor on the show, was having his team of seamstresses sewing face masks. So they had really been responding to the lack of shortage for personal protective equipment for the hospital workers who are on the front line of the pandemic, and really saying, hey, we're going to rally our resources and come into support. And I have really felt, I've always felt like healthcare is a team sport, and that it requires all hands on deck to really tackle some of these more complex problems. And so it's been really heartening to see the different folks who may not have traditionally been looking at these problems now jumping in with their tools, their resources, and support to help push us over the finish line, if you will. So I think it creates space for novel solutions. Like, this is a novel virus, but it's creating space for novel solutions that we may not have considered in the past, as well as new types of partnerships, new business models, and new potential channels that we could potentially explore to deliver our offerings out into the world. And so, yeah, it's interesting to think, are you a change maker or are you an order taker? And in this environment, it's easy to be a little bit of both. And it's just about thinking about how bold you want to play. It can be a little bit of a paralyzing situation when you feel overwhelmed by all the challenges and the problems. But if you really tackle and identify a niche area where you think that you can add value, there could be doors opening.
I think and I think that even for people who are not entrepreneurs, I think it's starting to give people a little bit of a nudge to think about getting more entrepreneurial. And not to say that they're going to quit their regular 9 to 5, but I think people are feeling like, I can't rely on this one source of income, or I can't rely on the fact that, or not even just about reliance, but I also like that sense of not wanting to have your fate be in someone else's hands completely. And so I signed up for one of those free course creation, I guess it's a course creation course. And so everybody gets welcomed and you put your little post. So it's been interesting to read the variety of people who are taking this time to find out, could they create a course on, and I mean, the range of topics it's insane, but I feel like there is something for everyone that they're interested in. So I think it's also an interesting time for people who would not have traditionally considered themselves an entrepreneur, that they're starting to get at least entrepreneur curious, if that makes sense. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I spent many years as an intrapreneur, so doing innovation inside of larger companies that were moving into new spaces. So I think there is an opportunity, if you have that entrepreneurial spirit, to contribute in whatever way you find. So the question out there to you all is, what's your niche? What's the specific problem or challenge that you see that you're looking to solve for? We'd love to hear in the comments. Let us know what you're working on, what you're thinking about, what's sort of keeping you up at night, as you're trying to figure out, how do I leave my unique handprint on the world? And if you are enjoying what you're hearing, you're loving the podcast, share it with friends who you think would also find this to be beneficial. And I think it's time for us to close it out with a little karaoke. What do you say?
With our closeout karaoke, here we go.
This is a classic. There have been times that I thought I couldn't last for long.
Now I think I'm able to carry on.
It's been a long time coming.
Change don't come. Yes, it will.
Only but a day.
And on that, the change is going to come. And in case you didn't notice, we've shortened it down to 15 minutes, and we're going to give you bite-sized pieces that will hopefully make your day a little brighter.
Exactly. Hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a beautiful day, everyone.
Bye.